Good evening, Kalisperasas. Uh, Let us begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we gather today, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and we pay respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. I extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today as well. We're just past the halfway mark of this year's program. Winter has surely set in. Many of you are off to sunny Greece, but don't forget that the seminars delivered live online can be followed from anywhere in the world through Facebook or YouTube links. With most seminars, whether they're online or at the mezzanine of the Greek Centre, we do try and make the recordings available within a few days for those who are not able to attend. Next week's seminar is also online. It's by South Carolina-based Alex Bilinis on the role of Greek cotton merchants in the American Civil War. It's quite an intriguing bit of history. But let's return to tonight's topic. And in this respect, I'd like to thank Kostadina Dunis, who's the sponsor of tonight's seminar. Thank you, Kostadina. And we encourage you all to become sponsors of a seminar of your choice during the course of the series. Tonight's topic is the Asia Minor Campaign and the Fate of Returned Soldiers by Dr. Dimitris Kamouzis. Dimitris also appeared in our program in 2022, where he spoke about Constantinople and the Great Idea, Migali there. So it's wonderful to have him back speaking on an equally fascinating topic. When we speak about events in Asia Minor of 1922 and 1923, what often comes to mind, the images we have, those that take prominence, are the thousands trying to flee approaching Ottoman troops and irregulars and lining up on Smyrna's promenade, on Smyrna's waterfront, with the hope of boarding any evacuating ships. We also think of the Treaty of Lausanne, the exchange of populations and attempts by an inadequately resourced Greek state to resettle refugees from Asia Minor. What often doesn't come to mind, is less discussed, receives less attention, are the returning troops, those that manage to survive and make their way to Greece. No doubt they were traumatized. How did they cope in re-establishing their lives in Greece, which was already overwhelmed dealing with the refugee resettlement aftermath? How did society respond to them? Were people appreciative of their efforts? One must also not forget that Greece was also suffering war fatigue. Since the Balkan Wars of 1912, it was continually on a war footing. Don't underestimate such an impact has on families, always fearful that their sons would be conscripted. Returning soldiers don't just return and pick up where they've left off. They don't just return to their civilian roles, or return to normal family lives. We see the devastating impact of all wars on returning soldiers. This is the topic of our speaker tonight, Dr. Kamouzis. This is the topic he will flesh out. A few words about Dimitri. He's a researcher at the Center for Asia Minor Studies in Athens. The center is located in Plaka. It's definitely worth a visit. It has some amazing collections and displays. Personally, when I visited the center, I was quite impressed by its Karamanlidika book collection. These are books written by Ottoman Greeks, written in the Turkish language, but also using the Greek alphabetic script. He has completed a PhD in history at the Department of Byzantine and Modern Greek Studies in King's College in London. He has published extensively, and his latest work being as a co-editor of the collected volume Έλληνες στρατιώτες και νικησιατική εκστρατεία, πτυχές μιας οδυνηρής εμπειρίας, Greek Soldiers and Asia Minor Campaign, Aspects of a Painful Experience. We will be posting web links on Facebook and YouTube, to show you how you can sort of purchase this book. And as far as I know, hopefully next year, an English edition will also be available. Welcome back, Dimitri. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you, Nikos, for your kind words and your kind invitation. I'm really happy to be with you once again. Good morning from sunny Athens. Good afternoon to your to the viewers, to fellow Greeks and anyone else, obviously, who's watching from Australia and elsewhere. My topic for today, as you said, is the Asia Minor Campaign and the fate of the returned soldiers. I'm not sure. Can you see the first slide? Right. So, okay. Uh, just just a few words before we start. Um, Before we go into the main presentation, we need to understand why Nikos said a few things of why the issue of the Greek soldiers who fought not only in the Asia Minor campaign but already from the Balkan Wars is important for Greek historiography and for modern Greece overall. Um, 2022, as Nico said, was a very important commemorative year for Greece. But contrary to the previous big celebration of the 200 years from the Greek Revolution, which was celebrated despite the difficulties of the pandemic at the time. 1922 marks a very painful event, perhaps the most traumatic event of modern Greek history, the Asia Minor Catastrophe. What is the Asia Minor Catastrophe? I'm sure a lot of your viewers know. It basically marks the end of the Greek-Turkish War of 1919-1922, the collapse of the Asia Minor Front, the atrocities committed against the non-Muslim population of Smyrna and the fire at Smyrna, atrocities committed by the Kemalist forces and the irregulars, and obviously the violent displacement and uprooting of approximately 1.3 Asia Minor Greeks who left in two waves. The first wave in September 1922, the second wave under the Convention for the Exchange of Greek-Turkish Population signed at Lausanne in January 1923. And these people became refugees, eventually settled in Greece, and in several decades were incorporated into the Greek society. At the same time, we should mention that approximately 350,000 Muslims, mainly from Macedonia, Epirus, Thessaly, Mytilene, Crete, were also forced to take the opposite direction and become refugees in what would become the Republic of Turkey. But another, obviously, part of the commemoration was remembering, and it was obvious, remembering that trauma, remembering the uprooting, the catastrophe, but also what has remained fairly unknown from historical point of view is what happened to the soldiers. We need to, again, think about the numbers. From 1912 until 1922, approximately 400,000 young men from Greece fought for 10 years the Balkan Wars, the First World War, and then obviously the Greek-Turkish War of 1919-1922. Out of these 400,000, approximately 200 to 230,000 soldiers fought from 1919-1922. From this number, more or less 40,000 never returned. They were killed in Asia Minor. 14,000 came back crippled from the war with several injuries that followed them for the rest of their lives. From the more or less 40 to 50,000 POWs, prisoners of war, only 14,000 managed to return. And then, of course, we need to take also into consideration how many of these soldiers suffered from psychological trauma, what we call today the post-traumatic stress syndrome. We don't have exact numbers, but we have, let's say, three small elements that gives us an idea. The first one is the fact that after 1922, all the psychiatric wards of hospitals in Athens and in Thessaloniki were full of Greek officers and Greek soldiers. The second thing is we have an increase of domestic violence, and this is something that we gather both from statistics but also from the Greek newspapers of the interwar period. And we need to understand this was something that was expected. If you think that the fact that the violence these people experienced, whether they committed the violence or whether they received this violence, death, difficult circumstances for 3 years, and we should think it as simple as that. If, let's say, a boy of 18, 19, 20 years old, let's say, left Kalamata, they went to Smyrna, and then 500 kilometers inwards to Ankara on foot and back, and then these men had to return to their private, to their villages, to their homes, and they had to readjust to their former way of life. It's impossible. You could understand that these people could not discuss what they witnessed, what they did at war, and also we should not forget that these people, apart from all the other issues, they had to carry on their back also the label of losing the war, because that was the Greek-Turkish War ended up in a major defeat and in the catastrophe of Asia Minor. And the third factor that shows us the impact of trauma, psychological trauma, is we have a lot of these veterans committing suicide. There is this incredible cover from the newspaper Vladimir of 1930. I will show it further down in one of the slides, and it shows a veteran who committed suicide. He hanged himself. He was living in Dionysio Areopagitou, a street right under the Acropolis, and in his letter, he writes that he committed suicide due to the nevrasthenia, the disease of the nerves, as he calls it, created by the campaign, and the fact that he cannot work. And this is also an issue that we will deal with, how the welfare system, the Greek welfare system of the time, dealt with these veterans when they first came back from Asia Minor. Now, this is an introduction. What I would like to do first is to, in very simple terms, show, discuss the events that lead to the Asia Minor campaign and what happens at the Asia Minor front. So this will be the first part of my presentation. And the second part of the presentation is obviously the fate of the returned soldiers and the frictions, social, political frictions created once they returned, vis-a-vis also the presence of 1.3 million refugees in Greece. So we will start with the first part. Everything starts with a national schism, ethnikos dichasmos. Basically, it's the major political disagreement between King Constantine I and Prime Minister Eleftherios Venizelos. The main issue was whether Greece would participate in the First World War and on what side. King Constantine, who had family bonds with the Emperor of Germany, and also he was a Germanophile. He advocated neutrality, understanding that Great Britain was the naval power in the Mediterranean, and therefore it was impossible for Greece to be an enemy to such a superior naval opponent. On the other hand, Eleftherios Venizelos was eager to participate in the First World War on the side of the Entente, and especially on the side of Great Britain. He had realized that Greece could benefit in territorial terms from participating in the First World War. He had also realized that Greece, as an up-and-coming naval power, would definitely benefit by its relation and its connection with Great Britain. And for Venizelos, obviously, the Great War was an opportunity for the realization of the Μεγάλη Ιδέα, the great idea. What was the great idea? The official policy of Greece since the mid-19th century of liberating the unredeemed brothers in Greek-populated areas in the Ottoman Empire and unifying these territories and these populations with Greece. Ethnikos dichasmos, the national schism, in very basic terms, Venizelos resigned twice in 1915 as a result of King Constantine's efforts to obstruct the participation of Greece on the side of the Entente. In 1916, Venizelos leads the national movement in Thessaloniki. He creates the government of Thessaloniki. So basically that meant the split of Greece into the state of Athens, into the state of Thessaloniki. The Allies supported Venizelos, and after an Allied blockade and after violent events that took place in 1916 and 1917, eventually King Constantine was forced to leave the country. He was exiled. His son took his place, Alexander, and 1917, Venizelos brings back the parliament of 1915, the parliament of Lazarus, as they called it, because it was like a resurrection. And from this point on, Greece participated in the last phase of the Great War, especially on the Macedonian front, and was among the victorious powers. He was among the victorious powers of the Entente. We see here a Greek military unit participating in the Allied parade of victory in the Arc de Triomphe in Paris. From this point on, Venizelos tried to push for the territorial claims of Greece in Eastern Thrace, the islands, and obviously the western coast of Asia Minor and Smyrna. The opportunity was given a few months before the parade in May 1919. The big three, so Great Britain, France, and the United States, ordered Greece to land in Smyrna. The pretext was the protection of the local population and keeping order. The fear was the presence of the Italians in Antalya, and they were trying to push further to Smyrna under their own, obviously, territorial claims. So therefore, the Greek army landed in Smyrna on 15 May 1919. The local population welcomed the Greek army as liberators for Greece and for Venizelos. That was the beginning of the realization of the vision of Greater Greece and the unification of Smyrna with the Greek state. Nonetheless, on the day of the landing, there were clashes between the Greek troops and Turkish and the Turkish garrison. There were people killed, and then that was the beginning of what would later be called the Greek-Turkish War of 1919-22. These events were treated with outrage by both the Allies and Venizelos. Venizelos realized that that was not the beginning he had in mind when the Greek troops were sent to Asia Minor. But the Greek landing at Smyrna basically meant at the same time the birth of a Turkish national movement of resistance under Mustafa Kemal Atatürk. You see him on the upper picture, inspecting Turkish troops. He managed to create a Turkish national movement from former Ottoman troops, but also irregular Tsetes. And on the picture down, you see Halide Adivar, She was a feminist, author, and Turkish nationalist, one of the most well-known figures in Turkish history. The picture you see is just 1 week after the Greek landing at Smyrna. She gave a speech. She delivered a speech in Istanbul in front of 70,000 people, where she actually spoke about the need for resistance. So from this moment on, after the Greek landing at Smyrna, we have the official, let's say, start of the Greek-Turkish War. Now, there are two phases. If we want to divide it, there are basically two big phases of the Asia Minor campaign. The first phase is the phase of the clearing operations that lead to the Treaty of Sèvres. So basically, throughout this phase, the Greek army is moving inwards, taking place like Prusa, Chios, and so on several sides of Asia Minor. These clearing operations take place in June 1920. By the end of June 1920, these clearing operations were successful, and therefore, on the 10th of August of 1920, we have the signing of the Treaty of Sèvres, which meant, at least on paper, the creation of Greater Greece. On the left, you see you have a picture of the Greek troops entering Chios, and we have other pictures, similar pictures with the local Greek population would receive the Greek army as liberators, parades with Boy Scouts, the local lay and religious leaderships, Greek flags, and so on. And on the right, you see a map of Great Greece. That map was printed in London by the Greek ship owners there. And the maiden says, η Ελλάδα προοριέται να ζήσει και θα ζήσει, so Greece is destined to live and will live. This ideally would be Greece if the Treaty of Sèvres had been applied, which in the end proved a task that was impossible to accomplish. The reason why it was impossible, one of the reasons at least why it was impossible to accomplish, was the loss of the elections of November 1920. Venizelos thought that he would win these elections. That was not the case. The anti-Venizelist coalition, led by Dimitris won these elections. We can discuss later on the reasons if you wish. From this point on, we have the replacement of all the high-ranking officers from Venizelis to anti-Venizelis. So from Leonidas Paraskevopoulos, the chief of staff, and all the other officers were replaced by royalists or anti-Venizelis officers. Anastasios Papoulas becomes the next chief of staff. A referendum is held in Greece, where King Constantine returns to his throne. His son Alexander had died a few months earlier by a bit of a monkey, by a very weird accident. So this is the second phase of the campaign. Second phase of the campaign, I'm not going to go into a lot of details, but basically the main purpose is to crush the Kemalist movement all the way to Ankara. Constantine, as you see on the right, he actually went to the front. This is a picture in front of his headquarters in Eskişehir. And after, in the summer of 1921, after a terrible battle that you see on your left in Zagarios, there was a stalemate. For 1 year, the front remained unchanged. The Greek army returned to the line of Eskişehir, Kütahya, Afyonkarahisar. And in August 1922, there was a counterattack by the Kemalist movement and the Kemalist troops. The front collapsed. The Greek army, without the support of the Allies, the financial support and military support of the Allies, from November 1920 onwards, had become very weakened, and there was basically a very shift retreat of the Greek troops, which resulted, which resulted in the Asia Minor catastrophe. Now these are three images of interest and of importance. We need to point out that the Greek government and the Greek state from the beginning had made no provisions in case for the population, for the local population, in case the Asia Minor front collapsed. So the Greek troops were the first to evacuate Asia Minor. We see up on the right, that's an image of the Greek troops returning. That's on the outskirts of Smyrna. And on the left, this is the cover of Le Petit Journal Illustré. The Petit Journal was a very well-known Parisian newspaper at the time. Was very popular. It had approximately 1 million readers per week, and it had this magazine once a week, and the cover of 24 September 1922, so a week later after the Asia Minor catastrophe, was called La Défaite Grecque en Asie Mineure, so the Greek defeat in Asia Minor, and it shows exactly the soldiers, the refugees, the Asia Minor Greeks following them, Smyrna in flames. We need to understand that on the retreat during the retreat, the Greek army committed atrocities, also burned villages. There was a lot of violence on their way back. And what's interesting is the fact that a French newspaper used this cover, and for the first time, and this is something that we need to point out, they had realized that the Asia Minor campaign, so the Greek-Turkish War of 1919-1922, was not a unique phenomenon, but it forms part of the Great War, of what we would call the Greater War. It was the end of this totalitarian war of 1914-1918. The cover at the end was the caption was saying that the soil of Asia Minor becomes red by the blood of the innocent people dying, and these are images we did not expect to see after 1918. So therefore, we realize that the Greek-Turkish War should be seen as part of the Great War. And obviously, as Nick said in his introduction, the image down on the right is the catastrophe of Smyrna, is the fire of Smyrna, an image that has been imprinted in Greek collective memory, national memory, and Greek historiography. I think every child or everyone you would ask, this is the first image they learn and they remember when they're taught about the Asia Minor catastrophe. Now, we need to come back to the soldiers, which forms the second part of this presentation, and we need to realize, because we have the refugees and the soldiers in the images, what 1922 meant for Greece. I will start by a very simple, but as far as I'm concerned and out of my research, a very important and clear remark. Greece before 1922 and Greece after 1922 are two completely different countries. And the refugees with the soldiers play a very important role in making this difference. So again, I will come back to the numbers and try to explain. On the one hand, we have 1.3 million refugees from Asia Minor being added to a population of 5 million. We understand that this is a massive number, even with today's understanding of population movements. These people came to settle in a country that was financially ruined, politically divided, had no resources at the time to be able to accommodate, settle, help even basic terms, shelter, clothes, medication, these refugees. And on the other hand, we have another group traumatized in a different way. So if refugees have been traumatized by their uprooting, loss of families, of properties, the violence they experience from the Kemalists. On the other hand, we have the soldiers who come back, as we said, with physical and mental, psychological trauma. If we think more or less that, and that's a very conservative estimate, that a Greek family in the interwar period had 4 members, and we realize that the people who were affected, the native population, who were affected by the difficulties of the soldiers, so their families, and fathers, parents, siblings, and so on, wives, kids, children, we can estimate that we're talking about more or less 1 million or more of families being affected, native families, native Greek families being affected by the experience of the soldiers. So we have 2 pillars, the refugees and the native Greeks, mostly the ones who are linked to the experience of the veterans, who become the pillars where Greek society after 92 is built upon, socially, economically, politically, culturally. And obviously, there is friction between these 2 pillars. And we need to understand that the Greek state had to make some really realistic choices. Both of these groups need help, need welfare. The Greek state, with the help of initially Western humanitarian organizations and later on by the League of Nations and the Refugee Settlement Commission, focus on the refugees, which means that the soldiers were left out, at least at the beginning, from what would be considered welfare approach from the Greek state. Now, just to understand, again, with visual aid, the impact of the war on the soldiers, we need to go back to their experience. So on the left, there is an image from the front. The Greek soldiers, as I said, experienced some really harsh circumstances, and not only on the battlefield where they had to kill, or they witnessed their comrades be killed. Obviously, they had to experience violence, some committed violence. We have a lot of memoirs and letters referring to that violence, even violence against non-combatant populations, so women, old men, children. That was part of the war. There was a violence that was going back and forth from the Kemalist troops and the Greek army that included, unfortunately, also the local population, both Muslims and non-Muslims. The second is, as I said, the trauma. A lot of people came back destroyed physically. On the right, there is a picture from the military hospital of Smyrna of men wounded at the front. These people, when they returned, formed a politicized group that had to fight through their organizations for pensions, for compensations, for jobs. The Greek state had made no provisions for these people. So sometimes in other presentations, I use this non-historical term, but I use this term for people to understand a bit the magnitude of the defeat of the Greek army of that experience. And I say that 1919, 1922 is the Greek Vietnam. And it resembles a lot that also totalitarian war, because these people came back and they had to fight, as I said, for even the basic right to a welfare and to aid, to state aid. The picture down on the right, another big issue, the prisoners of war. Numbers fluctuate between 40 and 60,000 POWs. Only 14,000 returned. They returned under the auspices of the League of Nations and of the Red Cross. They form part of the Lausanne Treaty, and therefore they came back in 1924. This is an image of their arrival in Greece under wretched. We have testimonies of the time from the Greek press and also from Greek literature, and their own obviously memoirs saying that when we returned back, people wouldn't even look at us. They would call them ghosts, and we know for a fact that for decades the Greek Red Cross, some older viewers might remember that from Greece, the Greek Red Cross would hold messages on Greek radio asking for someone who was lost and make announcements of people who were lost, and the family still hoped the relatives were still alive and somebody had some information. And obviously, the people were killed there. Overall, in the 10 years, 75,000. In Asia Minor, 42,000. A lot of people were buried in self-made cemeteries like the one you see on the left. This is also an image from the front. I would like to go into a bit more detail with regards to their experience when they came back. On the left, you see the image I was talking about, the man who committed suicide in 1930. A lot of stories along these lines. A lot of men who never managed to readjust to a normal way of life. The middle image is Synithis typos anapyrou, people who came back from the war with physical disabilities had to end up being beggars. They would sell flowers, or they would sell other small items on the streets. It took a long time. For example, η Πανελλήνιος Ένωσης Τραυματιών Πολέμου, Pan-Hellenic Union of men wounded at war, a lot of times made demonstrations. We need to understand that a lot of these men supported and were supported by the Communist Party, the Greek Communist Party, due to the fact that the Greek Communist Party at the time had a very anti-militaristic approach, both with regards to the veterans, but also in their official newspaper, Rizzospastis. We see a cover on the right of Rizzospastis referring enadion του πολέμου, against the war, and then we see the image down, κάτω οι πόλεμοι, down with wars. So in a sense, even if part of these veterans were not supporters, were not leftists, were not supporters of the Communist Party, still it was the Communist Party that provided them with a political platform to claim their rights. And it's not a coincidence that tens of thousands of these veterans became members of organizations which were affiliated with the Greek Communist Party. It would take at least a decade, so it would be in the 1930s that these people would eventually get pensions, get some kind of compensations, and get jobs. In some cases, they were given small kiosks, so they would make a living. Overall, and closing this first part, of my presentation. We, in this collective volume that Nikos referred to, try to cover a wide range of their experience. So violence, issues of mobilization, mutiny, resistance in becoming drafted, the psychological, physical, and mental challenges of the war, what were the relations with the female population in Asia Minor, both Muslims and not Muslims, what were the relations with their families when they return, POWs, people missing, people who came back suffering from tuberculosis or crippled, amputated from the war, and obviously a very important issue that had to do with the commemoration of the 100 years of 1922, trauma and memory, and how that memory was transmitted from generation to generation. If we have the time later in the questions, I will give you a few examples of people who actually approached me after the publication of the book to share stories of the grandfathers or of the parents, to share material. And for us, I think that overall, especially for me, who before that I was dealing mostly with the issue of the refugees, it was an eye-opening experience, and I think it was the same for the people who read that book. I'm saying that, and I would like to close with this remark. The book was very successful last year, and I'm not saying it because we were the ones, myself and Alexandros Makris and Haraldos Minasidis, the editors and the people who participated, our authors. I'm not saying it because of us, but I'm saying that the people wanted to read about this experience. I mean, they were mature enough to be able to understand that in a totalitarian war, people kill, get killed, suffer, and it was, I think, especially for people in Greece who had relatives in the Asia Minor campaign. Finally, someone brought the voices of these boys who became men in Asia Minor to the surface, and they brought them out of their silence. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dimitri, for that sort of fascinating presentation, and I'm sure we'll get quite a few questions from the audience. But let me just kickstart off sort of proceedings. Nowadays, genealogy or tracing back family history is something on the rise. Those that live the Greeks that live in the diaspora, is there some way for them to find out if some of their relatives participated in the Balkan Wars or in the Asia Minor Wars or something? Is there some type of database or resource or website where you can sort of search that information?
Yeah, for someone to be able to do that, there are two ways. One way is to reach the archives of the army. These are available. Like, for example, I managed to get information on my grandfather from my father's side, who fought from 1912 until 1922. He was also in Izmit, in Nicomedia, in 1920. So if you're a relative, you could actually apply and get all the relevant information. There is also the Μεγάλη Στρατιωτική Encyclopedia, it's called in the old term, the Greek military encyclopedia. So if someone had served as an officer, again, there is the opportunity to be able to first of all trace someone, and then again contact the Διεύθυνση Ιστορίας Στρατού or the archives of the army and get the relevant information. But yes, of course, if someone has a relative, knows of a relative who fought in either in the Balkan Wars or later on in Asia Minor, of course I can get information.
Okay. We have a question here from Athanasios Poporis, one of our previous sponsors. How many Greeks of the diaspora engaged in the Balkan Wars and also Asia Minor between 1912 to 1922? Because I do recall reading a lot of articles, especially Greeks in America. That's probably would have been the largest sort of country receiving Greek migrants at the time, who did volunteer to come back to fight in the Balkan Wars and Asia Minor as well. So, any idea?
That's a great question. In our book, there are two chapters relating to this question. The one chapter, authored by Charalambos Minasidis, refers to the Asia Minor Greeks, or Thracian Greeks, or Cosmopolitan Greeks, who fought either as volunteers or who were drafted, the ones who were also Greek subjects, who were drafted and fought for the Greek army. And the second chapter is the chapter by Zographos, Anastasios Zographos, who actually refers to men from the diaspora, so basically in Europe, the United States, who were drafted. The numbers fluctuate. I think that I don't have a clear number, but right now I need to look at the book. But it is in thousands, obviously, especially the Asia Minor Greeks. Contrary to what was thought and what had passed as a stereotype, that the Asia Minor Greeks or the Cosmopolitan Greeks or the Thracian Greeks had not fought in the war. That's not the case. What is interesting is that in a lot of cases, especially from the Greeks of diaspora, these are the cases where we have resistance to be drafted. So in a lot of cases, and Zographos refers to that, once the Greek diplomatic authorities would call these people to, these men to assist, to mobilize them and become soldiers, they would try to find ways to avoid being drafted. We have cases like that, and these information come from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. But on the other hand, obviously, we have men who fought or supported financially the war effort. We should not forget that, especially from the United States, you had donations for the support of financial donations, that is, for the support of the Greek army, and the communities of Greek Americans at the time was a very important resource, especially financial resource for the war effort. And this becomes apparent from the archives, becomes apparent from memoirs and also literature. Just what comes to mind, for example, is the third book from Elia Kazan, which refers exactly to that story of an Asia Minor Greek who actually returns to fight with the Greek army in Asia Minor.
Okay. I have a question here from Kostas. You mentioned the radio announcements of Red Cross. Do we have any numbers on how effective or not their campaign was?
The campaign of the Asia Minor campaign, of the campaign of the Red Cross.
Of the Red Cross.
Yes, the Red Cross was very effective. The Greek Red Cross was very effective throughout the period 1919 to 1922, and I would say even to 1924. It established missions in Constantinople, in Smyrna, and on several areas where the Greek army, Thrace, Pontus, where the Greek army was fighting. It had the Greek Red Cross. The missions of the Greek Red Cross was dual. The one was to create a welfare network of welfare and of aid for the local population. First of all, Asia Minor Greeks and refugees from the different areas where they had been displaced throughout the war, but also for a population of belonging to other ethnic or religious groups. The second role, especially after the Greek landing at Smyrna, was to become a pillar. It was one of the pillars, at least, for the support of the war effort. It treated soldiers, officers, and soldiers who were became sick or wounded. We're talking about thousands of these cases. And after a point, we need to understand also that its personnel, including doctors, nurses, they trained Asian and Greek women to become nurses. They also become assistant nurses. In a sense, in a period of 3 to 4 years, they created a whole network of clinics, hospitals, infirmary. So yes, very important role. And afterwards, obviously, it was important for the POWs. We need to understand that the Red Cross, the International Red Cross, but also the Greek Red Cross and also the Red Cross in Turkey, were the ones who would monitor, in the case of Turkey, the Greek POWs, in the case of Greece, the Turkish POWs, until the exchange of populations. For example, we have pictures and letters sent back and forth to show that the conditions of the POWs was up to standards. That was, of course, not always the case. We saw images of the Greek POWs, but nonetheless, the Greek Red Cross, I think, was one of these organizations who played a major role in aiding both the military, but also the local population throughout these harsh conditions of war.
Since we're on the topic of Red Cross, I'll ask the next question from Mark. Do we have any records on the last known locations of soldiers who went missing in action? Are there any special records in conjunction with the International Red Cross? So has any researcher looked at International Red Cross records over that sort of period?
Thank you, Mark, for your question. This question shows exactly how much research needs to be done still. I mean, we made a start. We tried to cover some of the aspects, but you realize that, again, this is a great question. Yannis Glavinas has authored a chapter in our book on the POWs. Yes, there are some information. We have some lists of people missing at the General State Archives. Yannis has written a chapter on that. Has written an article also that is on academia on this issue. We definitely need to compare the data from the General State Archives with the data of international organizations and International Red Cross. I know that he's now working on actually writing a book on people missing in POWs, on soldiers missing in POWs. But this is something that, again, needs more research. And Yannis, I know that Glavinas is actually his book will be a follow-up to his chapter, and he will include missing soldiers and officers in Asia Minor.
And I just reinforce that this latest book, which has been sort of co-edited by Dimitris, it is available. You can purchase it online from online Greek bookshops, but hopefully by the end of 24, an English edition will also come out as well. Yeah. One more question from George Lucas. Are there any military records that I could search to find out about specific soldiers to understand where they were sent and what they did, etc.?
Right. Usually the information provided by the official archives of the army is, in a sense, the changes in rank, where these people served, and whether they were wounded or they suffered from tuberculosis or whatever the case might be. So let's take, for example, the case of my grandfather. He was volunteer in 1912. So basically, his official his official document of the army says that he fought in the Balkan Wars, he fought in the First World War. They discuss about the ranks, and then that he fought in Asia Minor, in Izmit. He had tuberculosis, and the rank he had when he was discharged. This is the information you get from the official archives. Now, to get more information, you have to go to what we call ego documents, and this is where our book was based on, and the chapters were based on. Ego documents meaning memoirs, letters, cards, other archives like the oral tradition archive of the Center for Asia Minor Studies, literature. What else? Merologia. So documents that actually bring to the surface this kind of information. When we started the research, we were not sure what we would find. I was amazed to realize, I was amazed to understand and to find out that there are hundreds of those, some published, some non-published in different archives. We're talking about incredible stories, and also I realized that a lot of families have this kind of memoirs and this kind of written testimonies in their homes. So once the program finished and the book was published, a lot of people approached me and they were saying, we have this memoir or this numerology or these cards from my family. Would you be interested to read it, to assess it, and so on? And that was one of the, for me, one of the most, if not the most rewarding aspect of this book. That people approached us. They felt that we had spoken for their relatives on their behalf, brought their voices to the surface, and also the fact that they realized that their stories mean a lot, and they're not just interesting, they mean a lot for the understanding of the war and for understanding of that experience. If I'm not mistaken, I can send later on to Nikos a link of the program. We had uploaded there an overview of the work of the program, and at the end we had a list of some memoirs and some books authored by the soldiers, letters where people could actually, or viewers could actually have a first look, read some of these stories to get a sense of their experience with regards to the question.
Dimitri, okay, a book has come out on this sort of let's discuss topic. Have there been any documentaries, or is that a future plan?
On the Asia Minor campaign?
Well, on the returning soldiers.
No. On the returning soldiers, there hasn't been. On the Asia Minor campaign, there have been some.
Yes, but on the returning soldiers specifically.
No. No, there hasn't been. No.
It might be an opportunity to use the testimonies, and also the artifacts, the letters that sort of people have, the general public has as well. But anyway, hopefully, maybe a future project for you as well.
Let's see. Yes, but I think that would be interesting, because this is the thing, and this is something I realized when we were doing the exhibition at the Bernanke Museum, that if like the exhibition at the Bernanke Museum, the first and third part that cover the life of the Asia Minor Greeks in Asia Minor and when they came to Greece, I realized that it was very important for the descendants of Asia Minor Greeks. But the middle part, that was the Asia Minor campaign, I think that was very interesting for the descendants of the native Greeks. I think that they found what part of that narrative, the historical narrative, touched them more in terms of, family bonds, memory, trauma, and so on. So I guess, as you said, the experience of the refugees has been covered by documentaries, has been covered by But the soldiers know.
The returning soldiers know.
No, I think even in that case, like in audiovisual terms, again, the soldiers are not a part of that narrative.
We've got an interesting question here from Thanasis Potporis. Regarding the Asia Minor Wars, are there Greek war graves in Asia Minor? And if so, how have they been maintained? How are they maintained?
That's a great question. No, they haven't been maintained. No, there's no. There's, I don't think there's. I'm sure there's not even a commemorative monument or whatever on the presence of the Greek army there. I think these people were buried there, and afterwards, when all these small towns and villages and so on were restructured, these graves, I don't know what happened to them, but there's no visual evidence or monument or cemetery reminding of the presence of the Greek army in Asia Minor.
Okay. We're past the hour, so I think we'll have to bring this presentation to a close. Dimitri, thanks once again.
Thank you.
Best of luck with your future research, and
thank you.
We definitely hope to see you in future years as well. And
I hope so, and have a great evening in Australia.